So hello everyone. So now I'm carrying on going over Chapman's book, and I was just saying how I disagree. But I don't think it's a good reason why autism diagnoses have exploded because of neoliberalism. I think it's just simply the fact that we now have more understanding of the different manifestations of autism and just a lot more awareness of psychiatric conditions in a way that was just not before. A large part of that, by the way, is obviously the internet. People now have this information at their fingertips. You know, what used to be quite elite information, quite niche, you'd have to be in the know to know it. Now it's democratised. Like, loads and loads of people now have access to information about different disorders. That explains a large part of why a lot more people are now getting diagnosed. Okay. And that is generally, I think, a good thing. You know, I can't stand those articles that often appear in the Daily Fascist, you know, Daily Mail, about making it out like there's a massive pressure on services and stuff. They need to just fund these services more. They need more funding, and of course, like people like the right wing, who want to make cuts to services. They love to come out with these scaremongering stories and make it out as though these disorders aren't real and stuff, or yeah, that's just very reactionary. Anyway, I just carrying on now. So Chapman goes on to say that traits that were previously relatively benign, he says, became associated with some level of disablement. If they were relatively benign previously, though, the person can't be that disordered anyway. While the traits that might have only been minimally disabling became significantly so. I would be significantly disabled no matter what society. But I don't have the autism he's referring to. I have double plus disorder, to borrow from 1984. You speak. Double plus disorder. Superlatively disordered. Yeah. So yeah, that doesn't apply to me. He says, the new world, he says, increasingly stifles the thriving of even those who diverge in relatively minimal way from ever more restrictive cognitive norms of age. He says these forms of disablement are an extreme expression of the issues faced across humanity, for example, noise pollution, traffic. He says, yet instead of being understood as relationally constituted between the individual and environment, through the neo-Galtonian pathology paradigm, these forms of disablement are framed as an individual deficit. But I do have an individual deficit. That's a bloody fact, mate. I do. That's a fact. I don't want any euphemistic whitewashing. That's a fact. I have a deficit. It is real. It's like a bloody deficit. It's got nothing to do with society. Like, society makes my life a hell of a lot worse. Capitalist neoliberalism makes my life a hell of a lot worse. Austerity is violently aggressive against my way of being. That's true. But I'd be disordered even in a socialist ideal. I'd be disordered. I'd still have problems. It wouldn't go away. I'd still have an individual deficit, which, if I could choose, and I can't, I'd rather not have. But, you know, you just have to accept the cards that fate has dealt you, which I do, you know. But it's unfortunate, but I'd rather not have it. And it's weird, he says, you know, because it stops me doing other things. It's a hindrance, isn't it? You know, autism and ADHD and all those other disorders are hindrances. I'm getting assessed for ADHD in June to find out if I have it or if it's just the autism, because I definitely have a high level of traits of that. There's a high chance I do have some form of it, but we'll have to wait and see. But like I say, it's a hindrance. These things are disorders, like my executive functioning impairment, my extreme procrastination, my disorganisation, my distractibility. All of these are bloody hindrances. They stop me being as productive as I might otherwise want to be. And these are coming from within me. They're not caused by society. He talks about the neo-Galtonian pathology paradigm, implying that this is linked back to eugenics. That is so reductionistic. It's not linked back to eugenics. It's actually I would argue that actually by denying individual deficit, you're pathologising people. Because I'd say that, for me, I'd interpret pathologising to sort of imply, to kind of, in a way, kind of like top-down decide how a disorder should be determined, like take away someone's autonomy to define how a disorder affects them. To me, that's pathologising. So when someone tells someone, oh, don't use the word disorder, oh, you must all be positive, they're pathologising that person. That's, to me, is what pathologising is. I completely disagree. Anyway, he talks about the dominance of the pathology paradigm in this period allowed the idea to become wholly hegemonic. Yeah, mental disorder stems from individual dysfunction. I actually prefer, there is actually the biopsychosocial model, which, they never mention these neurodiversity advocates, but the biopsychosocial model is nuanced and balanced. It incorporates the medical model, the psychological and the social models into one. It's like a holistic way, so it doesn't reduce the person to the medical or the social model. It looks at the person as a whole, and it's an individual approach that looks at what is actually disabling, what is actually can be done to make a person's life better, what supports can be put in place. That's the social model, which is vital. That's absolutely vital. A medical model on its own can be deeply harmful, just as much as a social model on its own can be deeply harmful. You have to look at the whole, what's going on in the whole. But you can't discount the medical, and you can't discount individual dysfunction. In actual fact, a lot of Tories do that now. They discount individual dysfunction. They think, oh, a person can work from home. It's like, oh, according to the social model, that might look plausible. Oh, they don't have to travel now, they can work from home. But no, they can't, because they're still impaired. They've still got a dysfunction from within. So ignoring the medical angle can actually be really right-wing, and can actually facilitate cuts as well. So I don't know why they don't endorse a biopsychosocial model. That to me is just so much more balanced than any extremist social model, which is just as reductionistic as an extremist medical model. So he talks about, internal cognitive dysfunctions and empathy deficits. Well, autism is an internal cognitive dysfunction, I'm sorry, but it is. It's part of the reason why I really struggle to relate to people, and it's a real pain in the arse. Okay. I just hate it when people deny that. They could just bugger off. It's like, take their postmodern, you know what I mean. It just annoys me. Anyway. Even though I agree with him on lots of points here, it just annoys me. But anyway. Oh yeah, so he talks again about neoliberalism. Neoliberalism brought what Mark Fisher termed a privatisation of stress. So self-care became imperative for individual, focus on self-management took over the state support. So yeah, I agree with him there. I think that's a very important point. The privatisation of stress, an interesting term, coined by Mark Fisher. All that focus on self-care and self-sufficiency, it's very capitalist and neoliberal and right-wing, taking away support. He says, in the UK, the state support for anxiety and depression consists of a tiny number of CBT sessions used with the aim of returning people to work. And this leaves deeper problems untouched. Yeah, I mean, CBT is really just like a sticking plaster, and it's very capitalist. It's, you just have a few sessions, then suddenly, oh, you must be better now, because obviously it would be far more costly to provide more longer term support, but that's often what people need, but capitalism just doesn't provide it. He talks about the culturally influential Satsia notion that all mental illness is really people pretending to be ill to avoid a responsibility without a clearly defined biological impairment to get considered the malingerers. Yeah, but that's what I said earlier, like denying individual deficit, completely denying it, is basically almost like a version of that Satsian model. And in an echo of 1940s, as increased framing of brain disorders as economic burdens. He then talks about Spitzer's idea that there's something not just inherently dysfunctional, but also inherently harmful about neurodisabilities. I mean, they can be harmful, let's face it, they can be. We mustn't deny that, they can actually be harmful, yeah, they can. And he talks about Judy Singer. Judy Singer, very, very up there in the neurodiversity field. Autistics meeting, this was in 1997, so Autistics meeting upon cyberspace caught her attention. Autistics were not willing to give up their own customs. Rather than giving in to the pressure to act more normally, they were resisting this. They were pushing back against the idea that autism is in need of fixing. At that time, Singer was studying sociology, and she began to identify as being on a spectrum. I don't know if she actually had a diagnosis, it just says identify, I don't know. She had begun thinking about autism through a sociological lens of disability studies, which framed disablement as a societal more than an individual problem. This was grounded in her experience of being part of Jewish diaspora, outsiders who refused to assimilate and then paid the price. She was the daughter of a Holocaust survivor, and this made her relate to the new politics of neurological pluralism and refusal to give up autistic customs, sounds like a culture, in face of societal pressure. The social model of disability arose in the 1970s London. Two physically disabled activists were largely responsible for that. They argued that disability segregation was the result of contingent historical forces, and they formed an organisation called the Unions of Physically Impaired Against Segregation.